Wow, these people are into some pretty cool trucks. Look at those Defenders, man. Wow. I gotta pass by that again. That's a dead end anyway, so I gotta turn around. But man, those Defenders are sweet. Straight out of the old like safari movies and stuff. They have snorkels on them. They're ready. They're ready for a around the world trip. Look at these things. Cool. Cool beans. Another day, another ride. So since I just did a video about 10 things I love about this bike, I thought it would only be fair to do one on 5 things I don't like about it. I want to make it 5 because there really aren't 10 things I don't like about it, but this bike is not all rainbows and unicorns. There are some things I don't like about it. No bike is perfect. I like it generally speaking, but again, there are some things I would change about it. And so here are 5 things that I don't like about the Moto Guzzi Stelvio. Alright, so the first thing I don't like about this bike is probably the same thing everyone will say with regards to this bike: the weight. The bike is over 600 pounds. Now, it has to be said that this bike out of the factory came with engine guards and fog lamps and a big metal bash plate and panniers and the pannier mounting system. So all of those things, of course, are going to add weight. So generally speaking, it's probably about the same weight as a GS. But from what I've heard, the GS carries its weight a little bit better than this bike, partially because the GS has a flat parallel twin and that engine sits super low. And partially because this bike's just got an enormous tank, and when you fill that tank up, which it's full right now, the bike gets rather top heavy. On the street, this is not a big issue. Okay, I don't find it a big issue. I'm an average sized guy. I'm just under 6 feet tall, 5'11 and a half, about 180 pounds. I'm in decent shape and I have no trouble holding this bike up. But where it becomes an issue is when you're on gravel, when you're on dirt, when you're on loose surfaces. And this is an adventure bike and it's supposed to be able to do those things, but I'll splice in some video of me off-road on this bike. And I have to admit, I'm no off-road rider, I'm no dirt rider, but the bike does get a little hairy at higher speeds and also in turns when you're on loose surfaces. It's not the best for that. So the weight does affect it that way. The only positive thing about the weight is something I mentioned in my last video about this bike. On the highway, the weight of this bike makes it very stable. It's very good in crosswinds. Trucks passing by aren't going to upset the handling of the bike. None of that stuff will happen. So that's the great thing about it. But of course, there are drawbacks to this bike, and one of the drawbacks is the fact that it is a handful off-road. Alright, the second thing I don't like about this bike, while I'm lost in these little streets out here, who knows where I am, but whatever. The second thing I don't like about it is something that is specific to commuting on the bike in the city. So in the city, sometimes you want to slip through those tight little places here and there. And where are we? I have no idea where we are. Anyways, sometimes when you want to slip through in the city, you have to fit through narrow gaps, and this bike is not narrow. This bike is wide as anything. These saddlebags, I've mentioned before that I like the panniers, the saddlebags, because they don't have a cutout for the pipe, and so you can fit more in them. This guy gonna do something dumb? Nope. And so that's nice, you can fit more in the panniers, but because of that, Moto Guzzi mounts them wider than most bike manufacturers mount their panniers. So as a result, these panniers sit way wide out, and the handlebars on this bike are actually quite wide, but the panniers are wider than the handlebars. So you can slip through a gap with the handlebars getting through and then knock the panniers. I've never done it, but I'm always cognizant of it. If I've got panniers on, I'm hesitant about going through smaller gaps and spaces in between cars and between parked cars. We're not allowed to filter or lane split here in Ontario, but sometimes at a light you can get through and basically slip through, but on this bike it's a little bit more difficult. Alright, so the third thing I'm not crazy about this bike is that it's not the sportiest adventure bike out there. And you know, not to say that I'm not satisfied with having 105 horsepower. 105 horsepower is plenty. And the handling of this bike is pretty good. It's just, I guess I'm comparing it to more modern bikes. This is a 2012 design, and when this design came out, it was competitive with the segment leader at the time, which was the BMW R1200 GS. That was an air-cooled twin back then and made about the same power as this bike does and had about the same performance. But of course now I'm spoiled. I've ridden many nice bikes since, and the big adventure bikes these days are a lot more sporty now than this bike. So the most powerful bike in this segment now is the KTM 1290 Super Adventure. I rode both the S and the R model, and with 160 horsepower, that bike has an absolute mountain of power. And the best handling bike in this class is the Multistrada, which I also rode, the 1260, and that bike handles just like it's on rails. In fact, I just made a video. My last video was about the new V4 Multistrada coming out, so check that out. But I just find that to be the best handling adventure bike, probably because it's more road focused. It's got a 17-inch front wheel, it's got sport bike rubber on it, so it handles more like a sport bike. It handles very well. This bike, you know, it handled well when it came out in 2012. It was competitive back then, but now of course it's a little heavier, you know, steering. It's still, you can still toss it around. I mean, you can still do this kind of stuff with it, no problem. But and it'll take a turn at high speeds, but it's just not as confidence inspiring as those other bikes that I mentioned. So it's not a big complaint. I'm used to it and I like it and I like the comfort of it and all that, but hey, would I say no to an extra 40 horses? Nope. I'd definitely say yes to that. So not really a big complaint, and most adventure riders don't really care about the absolute maximum straight line speed or handling, sport bike handling capabilities of their motorcycle, but it'd be nice to have a little bit more. Okay, so the fourth thing I'm not crazy about with this bike is the fuel economy. Now, I've mentioned before that this bike has a 32-liter fuel tank, which is an enormous fuel tank for a motorcycle. But even then, when I'm riding around, 400 kilometers seems to be about the max amount of distance that I can cover on a full tank, which is a little bit short for such a big fuel tank. Now, I appreciate 400 kilometers is plenty. I like it, but you know, this bike gets what, maybe 40 miles to a gallon, maybe 38, something like that. My wife's bike gets like 70. Now that's a 300, and of course that comes with its own disadvantages, but it would be nice. Other bikes in this class get better fuel economy, and it might have something to do with the bike being air cooled versus liquid cooled. I gotta sit down just in case that's a police officer around the bend. I don't want to get dinged for stunt riding for standing, but I do like standing on this bike. So yeah, the fuel economy could be better. It would be nice to have a little bit more range with that big a fuel tank, or the same range with a slightly smaller fuel tank and maybe a little bit less weight up top here. Alright, so one reason why this bike might not be that great on fuel here take a look at the DAS right now. All right, we're getting on the highway here. We're going 120 kilometers per hour, and the engine's turning over at 4,000 RPM. Now, it's under 4,000 now, but we're going slower. So typical highway speed on here, most people go about 120. I'm going 115, 113, and we're about 4,000 RPM. Now that's pretty high for this speed for such a big engine. I think that they maybe could have geared it a little bit lower and gotten slightly better fuel economy on the highway. Alright, so the final thing I don't like about this bike is something that applies to you if you do not live in Italy. Now, I'm sure if you live in Italy, you Italians have lots of Moto Guzzi dealers around. And parts are made in Italy and they're readily available. But if you're in Canada, well, let me put it this way. I live in the biggest city in Canada. And in Toronto here, we only have one Guzzi dealer. And that Guzzi dealer is quite far away from me, and unfortunately, when there's a lot of traffic, it takes me an hour, sometimes more, to get to that dealer. So if I need to get a part or something fixed or pick anything up, it's a bit of a pain in the butt. That dealer's far away, and I'm lucky to have one because many other places in Canada you just don't have a Guzzi dealer around. And I'm sure that's true for the States, and I'm sure that's true for some other European countries that aren't Italy. Now, a related issue is parts. It's great that these bikes are made in Italy. It's great that they're still made in the factory that was started in the 20s that produced the original Guzzis. Moto Guzzi's still in the same factory. They haven't outsourced their production to China or Taiwan or anywhere else. And I love that. I love saying that, you know, this is pretty much a 100% Italian bike. But when a part is needed and it has to be ordered, it's coming from Italy, and it can take a month to get there. Like if something goes wrong on your bike and you can't ride it until a part gets there, and that part takes a month to 6 weeks to get there, that's a major pain in the butt. I'm not too happy about that when that happens. So generally speaking, I do like this bike. I know I entitled the video 5 things I hate about my Moto Guzzi Stelvio. That was a little bit of clickbait. I don't hate this bike, but there are some things I don't like about it. And I guess as a potential owner of the bike, if you're thinking about getting it, or if you already have it, well, you have to decide if you can live with those things or can't. To me, the advantages of this bike, how comfortable it is, all the stuff I can take on it, all the carrying capacity, the range, the uniqueness, the sound, the feel of it, those things outweigh the disadvantages. However, I have to be honest with everyone watching this channel. Every bike's got some things that are good about it and some things that aren't, and those are the things that I wasn't crazy about.
If you're interested in any of the gear that Brooke and I wear or use, or the camera equipment we use to film this channel, the links are below. Everything listed there was bought with our own money, and we are not sponsored by any company. However, the links below are affiliate links, and the channel is paid a small amount for referring you to shop at no additional cost to you. We do not recommend any products that we are not satisfied with ourselves, but we do strongly urge you to do your research and select the correct size for items like helmets and clothing. As always, thanks for watching. Your support is greatly appreciated. Please hit that subscribe button, give the video a thumbs up, and leave a comment below. And whatever you ride, enjoy it. Wave at other bikers no matter what they're riding. We're all part of a brotherhood and sisterhood. Keep the rubber side down, shiny side up, and may the spokes be with you.
Well, here we are on the lakefront in Pickering. I'm gonna get in trouble if I go in there. I'll roll in there and see if I can take some pictures of my bike by the lake. Hopefully people don't mind. Don't ask for permission, just do it. I got the pics and lit out of there before anyone gave me a ticket. That's the way you do it, folks. I'll be long gone before anyone shows up to tell me I can't do it.